Good evening, everyone. This conversation is in English, as you can hear. And I know there are a few new people that arrived after the speech, so I might repeat a few things. I might also close the door, actually. Just a moment. So my name is Silja Espolin, and I'm head of cinema and a film curator here at Kunstnernes Hus, and I've had the great honor to work closely with Erika on this iteration of No Master Territories, Feminist World Making and the Moving Image, which is the third iteration of a large project that started in 2020, was it? Around that time, pandemic. And it's my pleasure to introduce properly Erika to those of you who don't know her already. So Erika Balsom is a reader in film and media studies at King's College in London. She is the author of 4 books, including After Uniqueness, A History of Film and Video Art in Circulation, 10 Skies, and her writing has appeared in publications including Cahiers de Cinema, Eflux, Grey Room, and New Left Review. Her curatorial projects across the cinema and the gallery have taken place at venues including Haus der Kultur der Welt, where the first iteration of this particular show. Was that for me, the signal? No? You can hear, all right? Kunstverein Hamburg, Spike Island, Maxi, TIFF, and ICA London. In 2026, Columbia University Press will publish her criticism collection, The Edges of Cinema, Essays on 21st Century Film Culture. So, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Silja.
And to you. Yeah. So when I first saw this show in Berlin, the abundancy of practices, works, all the different voices from very different contexts and geographies placed together without any kind of navigation, pre-planned kind of navigation for the audience was kind of what was made a very strong impression on me. But then again, I know there was, of course, a very distinct curatorial interest behind this and a strict selection selection process you went through. So I wanted you to reflect back on what kind of practices or expressions were you initially looking for when you set out on this together with Hila Peleg. Were there specific gaps you wanted to kind of attend to? Yeah.
Thank you. We knew from the beginning that we wanted to look at nonfiction practices by and about women. And nonfiction for us was something that we understood in the absolutely largest sense possible. So encompassing experimental film, video art, educational film, activist video making, documentary, essay films. I mean, really kind of anything outside of a fiction feature length kind of film practice. And we also really wanted to think maybe about figures that had not received adequate recognition. This was not about kind of discovering invisible women or anything like that, but really just about recognizing that in the last 10 to 15 years, there have been huge digitization and restoration projects that have taken place in archives all around the world. And we wanted to take an opportunity to show some of that work that had maybe not been widely shown, or at least not widely shown outside of particular local contexts. So we specifically excluded certain kind of big names, or at least excluded them from the more obvious ways we might show them. So for instance, upstairs we have artist books by Ulrike Oettinger. So we include her, but not by showing one of her major films, for instance, or photographs by Agnes Varda. And we wanted to concentrate primarily on this period of the 70s to the 90s because that's where we felt there was this huge swell of feminist practices from around the world, but we didn't want to think about a particular beginning or ending, or to say this is the second wave or something like that, because when you say second wave, you're immediately imposing this very North American, Western European kind of temporality, and we instead wanted to think about a much more kind of polycentric geography. So we started with this kind of idea of making this huge kind of sweep of research, and then out of that, we started to see certain kinds of thematic clusters emerge, or certain kinds of preoccupations across works from different moments, different geographies, and we started to think about piecing them together in constellations that could make up a floor plan of an exhibition.
In the introduction to the pamphlet, it says that the selected works, I'm quoting, seek to invent new audiovisual languages for the representation of gendered experience. And we have examples in the exhibition, some more explicit than others maybe, of what we can call counter images, works that responds, portraits, or subverts representation of women in mainstream cinema, in pornography. We also have maybe responses to kind of the male-dominated avant-garde practices. Helke Misselwitz's works is responding or offers kind of a counterexample to the idealized nudes in a specific book by Klaus Fischer from the 70s, I believe. Everyone, or a large part of these works are kind of in dialogue with or responding to dominating kind of modes of representation, the male gaze to a certain extent. Is this kind of the faith of feminist film, that you can't avoid the male gaze, you always have to speak to? Or
I mean, I guess there's always this idea that like artistic practice is like a chessboard, you know, and you're looking for like what the interesting move to make on the chessboard will be. And that's maybe true no matter what kind of artist you are. But I think if you are someone who's making, you know, feminist films or videos, and you're trying to think about what, you know, you want to put forward as a way of representing the female body or women's experience or whatever it might be, then yeah, your move on the chessboard is necessarily going to take place, you know, in relation to the visual culture that surrounds you. But what that visual culture may be will be different across different kinds of contexts, right? So, I mean, the male gaze is a concept that Laura Mulvey kind of came up with to talk about a particular way of looking that was very codified within classical Hollywood cinema, you know? But actually, there are many, many different kinds of gazes. I would say that all of these works are responding to the dominance of patriarchal power, for sure. And the idea that they're inventing new languages for gendered experience for us was really a way of thinking beyond what for me is a very problematic concept, which is the concept of the female gaze. For me, there is no such thing. It does not exist. Sorry to anyone who believes in that. For me, no. Because there are many, many, many different kinds of gazes, and the idea that women, by virtue of being women, would share a way of looking, to me is like essentialist and a very wrong way of thinking. Instead, it's about kind of taking account of all of the different kinds of oppositional ways of looking and oppositional ways of making images that there can be. And I think that's why you see in this exhibition that there is a complete heterogeneity of style. There is no sort of like one aesthetic language that we can say is the right way to make a feminist film, or that would, you know, be defined as a female gaze, right? Instead, we see all of these attempts to invent a different way of looking, whatever that might be.
can you talk about the title specifically, because this ties into the world making, as in responding to already existing images, as opposed to world building, which is about fiction, maybe, or building something from the ground. Yeah.
So the title has two parts. No Master Territories is a phrase that we took from Trinity Minha, writer and a filmmaker. It's a section title in her book, When the Moon Waxes Red. It's not a title of an essay. It's a title of a section with several essays in it. She never explains what it means. But I thought this was just like amazing. I love the idea that it does not include specific reference to gender. It's instead about a much broader kind of emancipatory vision, maybe a utopian vision of a world without masters. And we can think of that refusal of master territories, of course, in relationship to histories of slavery, colonialism, but we can also think within an artistic context, or especially within a film context, about the still persistent presence of this idea of the master and the masterpiece, which we might want to instead dispense with. And I liked the idea of choosing a title from a book that was published in 93, if I'm not wrong, maybe 91. But to choose a title that is a return to the archive, because the exhibition is also about that kind of archival return. So that's the title. The subtitle, Feminist World Making and the Moving Image. Yeah, you mentioned the idea of world building. This was a show at Julia Stoschek Collection recently, and that is kind of touring, curated by Hans-Ulrich Obrist, about video games and about the idea of building fictional worlds, imaginative, speculative worlds through gaming practices. And I think certainly as a film studies scholar, we often hear about world building in terms of fictional world building, like the universe of Star Wars, you know, and everything that it encompasses. Absolutely valid, interesting concept, but not really the one that is at play here. Instead, we were thinking about world making, which people like Nelson Goodman describe as a redescription of the world that changes the thing described. So actually the idea of a kind of documentary practice in some sense, regardless of how, you know, loosely we conceive of that, a documentary practice in some sense is crucial. A relation to reality is crucial. And after the show happened in Berlin, there was someone who said, oh, you know, it's called feminist world making. And I was so surprised that then I went to it and I thought I would see all these utopian visions of like a world without patriarchy. But actually, I was like seeing an observational documentary about a trial for rape and all of these documents of what it is to live under patriarchy. And I thought, well, yes, but this is exactly the point. The point of feminist world making is to re-describe the world from a feminist point of view so that it can be seen and apprehended and felt in different ways. And therefore, a different world comes into being when we see it through that lens. And it's a wager, you know. We don't know necessarily if like this wager of re-description will come true, if the world will be changed through our act of describing it or representing it in this way, but it's a wager that I think we can take and that we can see that many artists have taken in the works that are in the exhibition.
The exhibition also points to the kind of lack of innocence within feminism, or there is a hint at least, although there are not kind of clear sections with different themes, which is kind of crucial part of your thinking. But there are some kind of threads or interests overarching the exhibition, and one of them is maybe the difference between kind of neoliberal feminism or lean-in feminism, the more individualized feminism for a few privileged women versus the more emancipatory, equal rights for everyone, maybe the roots of feminism somehow. This, and these kind of very different expressions of feminism is nicely contrasted, I feel, between with the two works closely placed to the entrance, Paper Tiger TV and Joyce Wieland's works. Can you just talk about the importance for you personally, but to include those works and place them there, and
I mean, I think we always have to consider what motivates our dive back into the past. And this was a project that was conceived very much amidst, I think, a resurgence of feminist thinking, activism, and conversation in the late 2010s. Some people would say, you know, post Me Too, but I wouldn't pin it only to that. There are many things in play. But one of the kind of strains of feminism that became very pronounced in that moment was what some have called neoliberal feminism, which was the idea that, you know, if we have a female CEO or a female president, then the work is done. And the idea of neoliberal feminism really is about individual advancement, achievement, happiness. It's not a project of collective liberation. And when conceiving this show, I think we were very intent on challenging that idea of feminism, and from the beginning really refusing it, sort of to produce a critique of feminism from within a feminist paradigm. And so the exhibition upstairs has, I guess, two possible starting points. Neither one is the correct one. Go which way you choose. But if you choose to enter via the left, you'll see a work by Paper Tiger TV from 1993 called Sisterhood Trademark, Hyping the Female Market. And it's really about how ideas of female empowerment were being used in the early 90s to sell products, essentially, like to sell Nike sneakers. Meanwhile, those very same sneakers are being produced in the Philippines by a majority female workforce for very, very, very low wages. So is that feminism? Well, a certain kind of feminism, certainly, but maybe not one that we would want to get behind. And so Paper Tiger TV produced this quite hilarious video that sort of appropriates various televisual genres to absolutely skewer this, what now would be called, you know, neoliberal feminism. And I think instead of assuming that there is something sort of inherent in women, this sisterhood that we all band together, I think it's much more important to think about solidarity as a political project that anyone can participate in, and that it involves really building coalitions across difference. And so on the other side, the other beginning of the exhibition to the right, you'll see Joyce Wieland's Solidarity, which is a film made in Canada in 1973 at a factory strike of cookie workers, primarily women. And Wieland films only their feet. So you actually like move away from the face as the site of individuality and uniqueness. And instead you just see people's feet on the ground as they're attending this rally for the strikers. And on the soundtrack, you hear a speech given by like a woman trade unionist. And the whole time for the 12 minutes of the film, Wieland has solidarity emblazoned across the center of the frame. And I think for me, this is, you know, a much more powerful idea of what a feminist politics can be. You know, one that is kind of linked up with other kinds of struggles and doesn't think only just in terms of gender. And so I think that this sort of critique of lean-in feminism, you know, it's one that is especially important in our time, and one that is also, I think, linked to an intervention that the exhibition tries to make in relation to film culture, where there has been, I think, a version of neoliberal feminism at play in the championing of a handful of female auteurs working in a very mainstream idiom, rather than kind of thinking about changing the criteria that we use to think about value in film culture, and to recognize that actually there are many, 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 many women who have participated in making moving image work throughout the history of cinema. We just have to look outside of 35 millimeter fiction film production to find them. So if we do that, we see not just a few success stories, but actually a huge number of women making work. And that's also why there are so many works in this exhibition.
And to combine so many works from so different contexts, is there also kind of a risk of losing important context?
Of course, of course. I mean, this, I guess, is the risk that we were, in some sense, like willing to take. But I would say that some level of context is supplied through all of the documents that are displayed on the reverse side of the projections. And for me, this is also a reason why it makes sense to do this as an exhibition and not just as a cinema program. Because, you know, at heart, really fundamentally, I'm a cinema person. And there's always a question. I mean, not just context is lost, but also the viewing situation of the cinema, and that concentrated form of attention is lost when these works are put in a gallery space, which is not necessarily the space that many of them were made to be shown in. But I think that there is also a gain through the way that they create constellations of meaning with other works alongside them, and the way that these documents can be used to say something about the lives that these works have had and the lives of the people who made them, which is a kind of contextualization we would not find in a cinema setting. And I think, you know, there are lots of ways in which film culture remains constrained by the frameworks of the single maker or the country or the genre. And so I think there is something useful in maybe breaking out of those kind of frames to put radically different works in conversation with one another, even if, sure, it does risk maybe decontextualization. But the hope, I suppose, is also that the viewer's imagination might then be sparked to go and learn more about those works. And that's why, you know, there's a reading room, or that's why there's the internet, or further resources. You have the internet, right? Further resources that one could pursue to learn more about what one has seen. This is just like a tiny tip of the iceberg.
And there are also works that pay attention to discussion, community building, reception histories in the reading room.
Resting room, reading
the
room?
resting room, reading room, not the rest room, that would be wrong. But well, Audience by Barbara Hammer, where
Classic.
she interviews her
Ultra
audiences in 3 different cities about showing films about lesbian sexuality. And they even discuss, do we want this kind of imagery? Very explicit imagery or not? And Sarah Gomez work. Yeah, can you talk about what I'm hinting at?
Yes,
yeah.
I understand. I mean, I think that in more mainstream film contexts or even art contexts, we have this idea that there is the aesthetic object and it is meant to stand alone. And there are works for which that can be true and so on. But I think that if we're looking at histories of feminist cinema, actually we find a lot of cases in which that's not really totally the case. And the idea is rather that the film is embedded within a social context, and it's meant to actually activate relationships between people. It's meant to be a catalyst that makes something happen around the film, after the film. And so we see in Sarah Gomez's Mia Porte that we watch this film, 30 minutes or so, about the contributions that women have made to the Cuban Revolution since '59. And then we see a group of women sitting in a cinema discussing the film that we have just seen and sharing their views about it. And this is a sort of, classic third cinema technique to foreground this idea of the film as a catalyst of social relations. And that's also a really important part of feminist film history, but it's hard to represent that in an exhibition. It's hard to represent that in scholarship because often those conversations are lost to history, right? They're not documented. But if we look hard, we can find some very precious documents of these kind of contexts. And so we have in the reading/resting room 2, I think, amazing works that do this. One is Barbara Hammer's Audience, where when she was on tour in the early 80s, she also came to Oslo at this time, but sadly she did not film the Oslo audience, but she did write about them in her diary and said that people here seemed afraid to respond to her.
She did actually not trust them.
Yes.
The Norwegian feminists.
Yes, but the London audience is also very reserved. In her film Audience, you see women responding to her after her films, and it's amazing to see the differences between, the sexy Quebecois women in Montreal and the Londoners who are just smoking cigarettes and talking about how, London is very bleak. In any case, we have Barbara Hammer's Audience. We have Abizag Tolman's photographs of the 1973 First Women's Film Seminar in West Berlin, where you see Claudia von Alemann and Helke Zander, the co-organizers of that. And we have Vibeke Lukkeberg's footage shot at that same seminar, which for a long time was presumed to be lost until it turned up here at the National Library, which is so incredible. And so this is also a very, very precious document of this kind of gathering of women around contemporary feminist film in 1973. And so I think this kind of reading room, it's small, it's set apart a little bit from the main space of the exhibition, but I think it's really, really important because it underlines this sense that the films are only a beginning, and the films are meant to spur us to discussions and reading and viewing and other things that happen, beyond the moment of just watching the film.
So for the second edition of this show in Warsaw, I guess you had fewer German titles and more Eastern European, Polish titles. For this edition, obviously, we have included a few Nordic titles. What does kind of this inclusion do to the show for you? Or do you have any
it could be
discoveries that would be interesting for us
Yeah.
who love hearing about ourselves?
It could be a question that I could ask you as well. But I can also try to answer. One of the works upstairs, which I find really extraordinary, is Tuija Lindström's The Girls at Bull's Pond, which is a recently restored film. And she's someone who is primarily known as a photographer, but made this film in relation to a body of photographs that she had made. And if you see it without listening to the soundtrack, the cinematography is outstanding, but it's only when you hear the sound that I think you understand what the film is doing, because the sound moves you across a huge number of different kind of emotional atmospheres over the course of about 10 minutes or so. I think down here, not now obviously, but normally, there is a loop of 7 films. And I think it's interesting that this loop, which comes from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, really replays, in a way, I think, a tension that is animating the project as a whole, which is a relationship between more experimental film practices and more documentary film practices. And I think that, in a way, for us, I think it was very interesting to think about how to combine those together in order to give equal weight to them, because I think that in the history of writing about feminist film cultures, often you see that scholars really lean to one side or the other side. You know, they really push towards advocating for more formally radical practices, or they push towards the documentation of social reality. And I think the loop that is in this space actually brings those together in an interesting way. But I wonder, I would also be interested to throw your question back to you. Is that allowed? No.
No, actually not, because we're running over time.
That's convenient.
No, I'm very proud of this loop. So for me, it's just important to say that this exhibition is presented across the gallery, the beautiful gallery upstairs, and the cinema.
And this is crucial to its conception, and also to why I think it's really an amazing thing to have it here at Kunstnernes Hus, because there are very, very few contemporary art institutions, I think, that have this commitment to thinking across these spaces and to understanding these histories as being in dialogue with one another.
And this is where we should ask you all to come back tomorrow at 10 o'clock, because we will actually
7.
focus in. Yeah, first. We are arranging a seminar. We have some amazing guest scholars traveling all the way from Sweden and Denmark to talk about Scandinavian feminist film cultures in Scandinavia in late 70s and 80s. It's not as niche as it sounds. You should all join us. And then we are screening a beautiful film. It's your favorite film, I heard.
Sometimes, like, border guards would ask me, "Oh, you're a film professor. What's your favorite movie?" You know, and I would, yeah, it's definitely one of my very favorite films.
And it's called, in English, Blind Spot, Die Reise nach Lyon, by Claudia von Allemann, who unfortunately couldn't come. She was supposed to be here with us. I have one last question, and that is, it was mentioned in the in Sarah's introduction in the staircase. I mean, how kind of increasingly urgent, at least she feels, this exhibition is. Just thinking back to 2022, it was like so many things, so many violent things. I'm wondering, has any works kind of changed meaning, or are there new layers you see in? Or do you regret not showing even more angry work? I mean, how?
I mean, there's quite a lot of angry, heavy work in there, I would say. I mean, I'll say two things. The first thing is to say that it's heartbreaking to me to see some of these works that were made 40 years ago or more, and to see how little has changed, you know? Because I think, you know, it would be nice if we could say, oh, how lovely it is to look back at these like great works that these women made in the past, and thankfully, like, we don't have to worry about the problems that they worried about, you know? But that is not the feeling personally that I get from seeing the works in this show. Actually, like, what I see are actually like wounds that remain open. And maybe, you know, it's not to say that nothing has changed, of course, yes, but, you know, the work is still ahead of us. That's the first thing that I would say. I think another thing that I would say is that in this exhibition, we have a work that was not included in the Berlin exhibition, which is Jocelyn Saab's Palestinian Women. And it's a work that I would especially like to highlight, because I think that this is obviously a hugely important issue for anyone, but also for feminists to confront in our time. And this is a work that Jocelyn Saab was making for French television, and that was not broadcast because it was censored by French television. And I think we are still living in a time when there is a presumed Palestinian exception, that, you know, freedom of speech and freedom of expression are there, but not when it comes to questions around Palestine. And so I think it's maybe that's less true in Norway than it is in some other places, and that's a wonderful thing about this country. But I think it's important also to, thinking about the suppression of that film when it was made and the way that that kind of restriction on expression is unfortunately still with us today around Palestine. So
we have to end here. Thank you so much. And the night is not over at all. And you will hear Erika again tomorrow, along with a lot of other great speakers. So stay at Kunstnernes Hus and enjoy the night.
thank you
Thank
for
you for
coming.
coming.
Thank you.